and get up.
What's up, Viral MTB? Brian here. Sitting here with Mick Williams from Williams Racing Products, and now as a part of Trinity MTB. And in this video, we're going to be nerding out on the Trinity bike, talking about what makes it special and how it came to be. So I guess we can start. Mick, maybe you just want to go into a brief background and what your part is in Trinity.
As you suggested, I'm third of Trinity, so Chase Warner is the, I guess, original founder. So he's from California. He had the original kind of concept. And then Nigel Petrie, a friend of mine, he is also, he's the fabricator in the whole process. So yeah, it originated from Chase's idea, contacting Nigel to fabricate it. And then I got brought on. I'm an engineer by profession, also own WRP. So yeah, that's how I kind of got involved in the whole thing.
We know you're the guy behind WRP, but I guess a brief background of like your riding, and then yeah, how kind of you were in a position to get involved in designing a bike.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I've ridden bikes sort of my whole life. So I grew up racing BMX, went off to uni obviously to study engineering, and kept racing while I was there, raced BMX sort of overseas and international level in elite, that type of stuff. And then, yeah, sort of naturally progressed out of BMX and then gone into downhill racing, did a couple of privateer World Cups, stuff like that. Like, yeah, obviously wasn't one of the top guys or anything like that. Not trying to make out to be someone I'm not, but yeah, did a couple of seasons of that. And then obviously when COVID hit, sort of was a little bit lost with what I kind of wanted to do as a mid-20-year-old, and had an engineering background, had obviously sort of a bit of an extensive bike riding background just in general. So yeah, started WRP, started making parts and whatever, and that was kind of, I guess, sort of, yeah, early to mid-2020. And then, yeah, I got brought onto this in December of 2020. So, yeah, it's all happened pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a steep curve into
it sure is,
owning a business and designing another bike.
Yeah,
and
you're telling me. Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Well, there's a lot of stuff we can get into with this bike, but I guess first, like, just what is it and what's its purpose?
Yeah, cool. So I guess the background of Trinity to start with, like when I got brought on, basically the design concept was a gravity bike that was gearbox-adaptable. That was like the basic design ethos. And initially my ears kind of perked up because from an engineering background, like gearbox or a form of a gearbox in a downhill or a gravity bike needs to happen in the bike industry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, derailleur hanging off your rear wheels, kind of not the best, but it kind of started with us being like, well, this is the basic sort of design principle. We want something like 170 up to 200 that's gearbox adaptable and something we can manufacture in Australia ourselves. Now, a lot of ideas got thrown around. Like initially, we're actually going to CNC the whole bike, like front triangle, everything. Basically, is two halves, bond them together with some securing bolts, a little bit like pole. And that design influences got a little bit on the rear end of this, because this is billet 6061 rear end that's modular, so you can have swap out stays and that type of stuff. But then we kind of we explored sort of different manufacturing techniques for what we think would make the ultimate bike, and also what we can manufacture, but ultimately what would make the ultimate bike. So a few things got thrown around, like titanium, obviously chromoly, 4130 chromoly, which this frame is. I think, like, yeah, I was saying, got a big BMX background, so I'm a big 4130 fan, like a lot of BMXs are. Like I had a 4130 race bike a few years ago. For BMX racing, it was a little bit noodly, like it was a bit flimsy. But I love that bike. That's my favorite race bike I've ever had. But the point being is like all my dirt jump bikes or all my park bikes, it's a no-brainer. They're all 4130 or a form of chromoly anyway. I was saying to someone the other day, it might have even been you, but like the thought of, say, taking your like your hydroformed aluminium or your carbon BMX race bike to the skate park or even to the dirt jumps, you would just be like, you can't even sort of imagine it, like it would snap in 2 seconds. And that's kind of been the vision that I've kind of had in my mind a lot of the time, being like, well, what is the application of downhill? Like, it's super rough. You've got like, obviously you've got suspension, but you need those forces to be dampened. Like, so anyway, like version 1 we made, so Nigel welded up out of 4130, so it was 0.9 mil gauge, 4130 seamless tube. And yeah, we took it to Handmade Bike Show. It was a bit of a hit. We rode it, and immediately I was like, this feels really good. Like, it kind of feels familiar, almost like a 4130 BMX feels familiar. Like, it just feels nice. You don't have like that jarring stuff. And it's sort of, it's kind of compliant too, like hugs the ground well, but yeah, it just feels familiar. And then, we had a version 2 frame, a version 3 frame, and then this is the version 4 frame. But the design ethos has kind of followed that trajectory of being like gravity orientated and gearbox adaptable. Obviously, I've got my own gearbox in at the moment, but and the other thing is we've got a flip chip in this. So if you run a shorter stroke shock, you've got a 20 mil deviation in the flip chip. So you can have either 180 mil of travel and a single crown for enduro and obviously a dropper, or you can run the big shock, flip the flip chip around and a dual crown and have it as a downhill bike with, or other than the axle to crown, but it's the same geo. So the design ethos has kind of stayed the same the whole way, what we've tried to achieve, but with the methods that we've thought are best.
On the initial prototypes, were the rear ends CNC'd as well, or were they steel?
No, so it's something that we discussed early on, like what we wanted to do. The rear end of the bike, like, as you know, like the flex or the feel of the swing arm is kind of pretty important, I reckon. So doing the rear CNC, we knew we could basically, like, because we're designing in CAD, you can get like, you can do like FEA on it and see how much it flex. Obviously that just kind of pops out arbitrary figures. You don't know how that relates in real life. But the point is, like, if you design and make something and then test that, you can kind of plot that, like, you know what that figure kind of feels like. And then if you get multiple of those figures, you start to kind of understand how the bike's reacting. So one of the main reasons we did like CNC rear end was to give us kind of the design capability to fine tune the flex. But then also because like the rocker is going to have to be CNC. Not have to be, like you could traditionally fab it out of chromoly or something, but generally speaking, you would CNC that.
Yeah.
The dropout to be CNC'd, the bridge probably going to be CNC'd, and then we're like, well, the only thing really that we wouldn't be CNCing in a traditional method would basically be the stays. And with our kind of concepts around the flex and that type of stuff, we decided that, the rear end being fully CNC kind of made sense. Initially, we were open to anything, and a little bit like the front end too. Like we've been open to anything at any point along the way. We just kind of tested it, saw whether there was something to be gained or lost, and change trajectory if needed. But that V1, I think, surprised us all that it was as good as it was, because honestly thought we might get halfway down the trail and just fall in half. But, it was good. The concept was good enough to keep pursuing. So
and so it's a modular rear end with interchangeable stays to fine tune the flex. Like, what's the process been like with fine tuning the flex characteristics of the rear end? And I guess like maybe what's been the differences in like the iterations on the different prototypes you've built?
For sure. So version 1 was quite noodly, like it was actually quite soft. again, like we really didn't, with version 1, it's like anything, like any first part, you don't really have a base point to move from. So you're just chucking something out there to get a figure and then, to take the necessary steps from there. So it was good. It rode well. Like it handled some of the rough stuff incredibly well, but it was pretty flimsy if you started pushing it really hard. Like, say if you like scrubbed a lip of a jump, you could feel it underneath you. And the main reason being was that it was quite thin gauge, like the width of the stays was quite thin. And the second being is like in the cutouts in the back, like in the CNC pocketing, the way or the geometry that you make that pocketing, so the trussing, can like change the torsional flex characteristics quite a lot. So in that version 1 pocketing, basically we had a Warren truss like we've got, but it was basically like triangular cutouts with no verticals. So you can kind of imagine it, I guess, but like when the stay wants to like twist along its length, is the verticals are really what's stopping that twisting, and the wall thickness at the back. But the verticals give a lot to that. So for version 2, we made the stays a bit wider, added the verticals, and it was really, really good. I bought version 2 here in September of 2022 and did some testing on it, and the rear end was very, very good. Version 3, version 2 was fully CNC, but it wasn't modular. So like each stay from pivot point to pivot point was all one piece. And then we made version 3, which was the same type of construction. So it was one piece, but it was heavier gauge again. So it was stiffer again. And for that, we also had like a flip chip in the axle to change like rear center lengths. That version was a little too stiff. It really mainly came down to the wall thickness at the back of the pocketing, mainly in the chain stays. Like it was, version 2 was quite good. Version 3 was a little bit too stiff. So this one closely resembles our V2 model, but now with the modular stays. So basically what I'm talking about there is, and there's a couple of reasons we did the modular stays too, is that when you CNC a whole stay as one piece of material, basically the piece of billet that you got to start with is quite large, and then the machine time to actually machine that's quite large too. You got to take so much material out, but then the opportunity for quality control errors to creep in becomes bigger because he's got a bigger part, that type of stuff, and even like stress relief, because anytime you CNC a block of aluminium, it wants to relieve the stress. So if you're taking a strip out of a massive block, you can have warpage and stuff like that. But so the idea of the modular stays came about, one, from a manufacturing technique, because each part we're making, like the distal ends are only, say, that big. So the distals would be like what your pivot is housed in, and then you've got the actual stay. And then like the stay, albeit kind of large, but it's machined out of a piece of flat plate. So you don't have to start with a huge block of billet. So it's good from a manufacturing point of view, but then also from a riding point of view, it's really powerful too, I guess, because you do have the ability to swap out stays in situ. So you don't need to pull the bike down. It can be sitting like this. You can undo 2 bolts, pull a stay out, because obviously the other side is supporting it. Pull a stay out, whack in another stay. And then what we're also, maybe shouldn't be disclosing, but what we're also talking about is like, because we can change the flex characteristic in the pocketing of that trussing, but then there's also the opportunity to change materials too.
Yeah, it's something that is, I think, unique to this bike. And I think you were saying too, there's an opportunity to like tune your bike for the track. I've had experience testing wheels, and it's like you do get to a point where like, oh, this wheel is stiff and it's good for this. This wheel's flexing, it's good for this. And it's like with a bike, you don't have any ability to fine tune that. Yeah. Or I guess on a standard bike, but I guess that's what you're kind of offering.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we were talking about it in the push-up line the other day, but like I think looking sort of cross-disciplinary is really powerful. And I was using an analogy, say, of like MotoGP guys. Yeah. And what the MotoGP guys have cottoned onto well before us, like years and years and years ago. But like, because those guys are in lean angles, like in the 60 degrees, like up to almost 70, I think. But like, the point is, like, if Marc Marquez is on that much of a lean in a corner, is that basically your shock only works when you've got like vertical forces acting on it. So the bike's going down the hill vertically like this. But as soon as the bike's on an angle or the ground is on an angle, so you're on huge off camber, is the shock's trying to work against that sort of normal force. So if you're on a 70 degree lean angle, your shock isn't, like if you hit a ripple in the track in MotoGP, your shock isn't doing jack shit. Your shock wants to experience forces that way, and the track's giving you forces that way. So they've understood that the swing arm is a portion of the suspension. Like its side-to-side flex is a portion of the suspension. So those guys are really, really gnarly in their FEA and computer analysis of that type of stuff. Because obviously, if it's a tight, twisty track, they'll run a swing arm that's shorter and really flimsy. So, and I think I was even saying to you, like, say if they're going from right to left, like how flimsy it is can characterize how fast they can go from one side to another, like it snaps over. But yeah, if it's a really fast, flat out track, big sweeping corners, whatever, they'll run a longer, stiffer swing arm. Because of course, as soon as it becomes noodly, you're losing power. So if you jump on the throttle and it's just snaking everywhere, you're losing power. So yeah, the GP guys are all over that type of stuff, and even mess around with materials. Some guys, like some teams run aluminium, some others carbon, some a mix of the two, depending on the track, all that type of stuff. And then even like, again, you just go down a rabbit hole with this, but like particularly if you're talking carbon, like you have a different layup from one side to the other if you've got more left-hand corners than right hand, or more left-handers are faster than the right-hand, and all, like it gets gnarly. And I'm not saying that should be introduced in downhill, because obviously the terrain is so wild, but if it's track specific, then
you can at least like narrow the focus a little bit.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You mentioned like different axle positions on one of the prototypes. What's been the process to getting the geometry into a place where it's at? And like, I guess, is there kind of a guiding principle for the geometry that's ended up on this bike?
So one of the original things that we wanted to kind of test was like a matched rear center to reach value. So this one's a medium, so it's 440 reach. It's also got a 440 rear center at sag. And then as the sizes scale up, like obviously that matching's at a ratio. So yeah, that's been something that's been fun to kind of experiment with. Like on this bike, it feels really balanced, kind of having that rear center matching the reach. And we've experimented with a couple of things like over the other models. So this is V4. We've got 1, 2, 3 that all had slightly different geo, which is kind of cool. And then a lot of it, to be honest with you, is sort of heuristics to just, knowing bikes that all three of us, but like speaking for myself, that I've ridden in the past and enjoyed, or it's felt too long or too slack or whatever. And yeah, I might have referenced before, but like I'm a big common style fan. I've ridden a lot of common styles, but say like the V4 has always seemed to fit me kind of well. I'm not saying the front is sort of necessarily, modeled off this, but yeah, I guess it was a bit of a heuristical data to know kind of what fits me, and yeah, what a company that I think have done that kind of well in the gravity space.
Yeah, totally. To get into the kinematics, what's the process of getting this to a good place? I guess kind of a similar question. Was there any guiding principles, and like what was the process to like arrive on something that you are running right now?
Sure. So with like the original design, I should have said the original kind of ethos of the bike was gravity bike, gearbox adaptable, and virtual high pivot.
Yeah.
obviously, like we've mucked around with a couple of things, but that was the one that we were kind of sold on from day one from a theory standpoint, like modeling in eye track and looking at it, and kind of looking at multiple different curves, whether that's like your anti-rise, anti-squat, leverage rate, all that type of stuff. Sure enough, as soon as we debuted, then Norco, I'm not saying like we beat them to it or anything like that, like they would have been working on it for ages, but like the Norco range came out. Obviously the new Forbidden downhill bike, that's a virtual high pivot. There's been some other kind of more boutique companies come out with it as well. So at the time, in the initial discussions, I was like, why hasn't anyone else done this before? And then everyone seemed to kind of catch up with it. To catch up with is probably the wrong phrase, but you know what I mean. By tweaking pivot points and that type of stuff, it can be pretty cool what you can achieve. And then if you overlay that with the iTrack idler, I think that's really cool too, because basically what happens is the high idler mount isn't in a fixed position, so it's not fixed off the mainframe, or it's not fixed concentric to a pivot. So if you track the axle's path, it's not concentric to the path of the idler. So what that means is you can fine-tune like anti-squat figures, anti-rise figures. So then another kind of design principle we had, say with V1, was matching like an anti-rise and anti-squat figure as well. iTrack I think are really cool. They're an Aussie company. They're out of Adelaide. So a few more people are starting to run that. I know Intense mucked around with it for a little bit, but
and I guess like what are the strong points of the suspension design that kind of like set it apart from either a high pivot or a VPP bike?
So notably what you can get with like the iTrack system and like virtual high pivot, but just say with the iTrack system is you can get, say, a very high efficiency with your anti-squat figure. So it'll pedal well. So in basically the first 30% to save your suspension travel is you've got like above 100% anti-squat figure, which will mean like when you pedal, it doesn't sag in the arse. Like it'll stay up. But then once you blow through, that becomes less active. So like your pedal feedback isn't as great because as you blow through that first 30%, it's logarithmic in the way that idler kind of is effective on the suspension. So you can have a very well pedaling bike, but then also something that descends incredibly well as well. And I think that's why the Norco range has been such a hit, is because they've got a virtual high pivot. And you've basically got this burly enduro bike that would outdo downhill bikes of only a few years ago, but then pedals well as well. That's kind of the design ethos around that.
You mentioned one of the design principles is the modular part of it. So I guess explain how that's accomplished on this bike and what are your options when it comes to the modular gearbox versus regular drivetrain.
Yeah, for sure. So a little like the rear end that's modular, we've got kind of a whole modular lattice section that houses sort of the bottom bracket portion of the bike, but also then the pivots. So essentially, if you were to undo these bolts here, the whole back end of the bike could drop out. So you could basically have the front end sitting as it is and the back end sitting as it is, basically just modular in that sense. But what that also means is the side plates can be swapped out. So you can have quite slimlined little side plates there just to house a regular bottom bracket. And then just, your standard cassette and derailleur at the back with that setup. Or you can have side plates with the bolt pattern for, say, a pinion. You whack a pinion in there, or you can have the side plates kind of as I've got here for my own gearbox. So yeah, I think it's kind of pretty powerful in that regard. You can sort of have it suit your needs.
Yeah, and I guess it's like with your design, it's almost future-proofed. Like if anything new were to come out, or you wanted to design something else, that you can just fabricate something to match.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in a sense, for sure. I mean, like say with designing my own gearbox, like it's been paramount having that bolt-in adaptability, because otherwise I kind of would have been screwed. So it gave me plenty of room to sort of play with. Well, not plenty, it's still quite confined really, but there was that bandwidth of space to use, so it was good.
Yeah. And I guess without getting too in the weeds, I'm sure we can do another video just on the gearbox, but maybe just quickly, what is it?
I've had heaps of people ask about it, which is good. All comments so far have been positive, bar one the other day, but that's cool. But essentially it's just a gearbox in a can.
Yeah.
Sorry, a cassette in a can. So you'll notice there's no cassette at the rear wheel. It's just a single speed external drive. And the cassette is mounted inside here. So you just got a very short section of chain that feeds to the cassette internally, so you don't get crap all over your cassette and chain and all that, and obviously keep that off your rear wheel, so it reduces the unsprung mass, but also means you don't have a derailleur hanging off your rear wheel. And that's problematic. I mean, snapping derailleurs all the time or bending them. But then also like a suspension performance, like just having a sprung member in of itself, like rocking back and forward, not concentric to anything. It's like as soon as you put a gearbox in, you just realise like how much better the suspension performs. So I've been pretty stoked with that, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, sweet. I'm excited to see what it ends up being.
Same here. It might change a little bit, but so far so good.
Yeah, it's been cool to see the prototyping process.
Yeah. There's been plenty of them, plenty of 3D prints, and it's going good.
Well, does that about cover it? Is there anything else that the people need to know about this bike?
I think that's about it. I mean, we've been pretty transparent with as much as we can be anyway. So if anyone's got any questions, by all means, email us or DM us or whatever, and we'll try to get back to you. Obviously, there's certain things we might not be able to share, but for the most case, I think we've been trying to be as transparent, or in some cases, more transparent than anyone with what we're doing and where we're going. So appreciate the support.
Yeah, totally. It's been cool to watch the process, just because not a lot of companies show that. So it's like, I feel like I don't know, me seeing it, I'm just like, it's cool to watch that progression. You feel like you're kind of a part of it, and I don't know.
I think at the end of the day, like, I'm speaking for myself here, but the other two boys as well, like at the end of the day, we're just bike riders, and like nothing more, nothing less. So people who ride bikes, we consider our friends. So why wouldn't you want to show your friends what you're working on? It's as simple as that.
Totally. Well, I guess what is the next step from here for the bike and the brand?
Yeah, for sure. So again, can't kind of give too much away, but we're making a few of them at the moment based around this model. So I've got one, obviously. Nigel's got another one, but we're also making another few. And then once that system's kind of all vetted out, which so far so good, we'll be going to commercial market. So we've got a pre-order kind of expression of interest list on the website. So it's all up there.
Sweet. Well, check all that out.
Yeah.
This is good chatting. I'm sure it won't be the last time. And
sure not. No.
Hope you guys enjoyed the video. And that's about it. We'll catch you guys next time.